Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in April. I feel like the last several months I've said, oh, this reading month has been weird for me, and I definitely see that there are different trends in my statistics that are happening. If you've been following me for the last 6 months, you know that I have been struggling with quality of books, but luckily this month has been the highest quality rating so far in 2024. So I'm hoping that this spike is the beginning of an upward trend. Talk about my stats. In April, I read 11 books for a total of 4,120 pages. That's the same amount of books that I read last April when I was graduating college, but it is fewer pages. I think I've been seeing a pretty consistent trend this year of reading on average much shorter books. I think I've been struggling to find fantasy to pick up, and that might be a pretty big cause of that. I had an average rating of 3.77. My average this year has been 3.52, so this is a very high spike above that. I have 2 books that I rated 5 stars. The average page count of a book that I read was 375 pages, and I read about 137 pages per day. I read 6 books from my shelf and didn't buy any. We're at a -9, but I'm about to buy a good number of books for myself, and my birthday's coming up next month, so I know that that number is going to change. And you can see my star ratings. Good majority of the books that I read were 4 stars this month, which is fantastic because I have had more 3 stars than ever this year. Then looking at my graphs, we have a huge mix of genres, and romance, for probably the first time in my life, is the most read genre of the month, and I definitely can feel myself burning out of romance. And I want to read some more fantasy. I think my fantasy portion has been lower this year than in past years, and I want to fix that, not only because it's normally my favorite genre, but because I want something good. I want to pick up more and find a new favorite. Back to these graphs, we've got series standing. I read 50% of books were standalones and 50% were in some sort of standing of a series. I read fewer audiobooks proportionally than usual, and I think that has to do with the travel that I did this month. With the demographics, I only read a couple of YA. Anyway, let's start out with the first books I read this month, and those 3 were ones that I read in my last vlog. You can go watch that here to get my more in-depth thoughts on all these, but I'm just gonna go through these quickly. All 3 of these were books that were personally recommended to me by my followers or mutuals on Instagram, and the first one that I read was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a French translated book that was published in 1995 and has recently come back into English print, and this is about a girl who has lived basically the entirety of her conscious life in a bunker with 39 women. They have been stuck, imprisoned with regular guards around them for years. They don't know what time it is. They can't show affection to each other. They're not allowed to do basically anything except for stay there. Our main character, once she's finally becoming a teenager and is able to ask more questions, is trying to figure out what their situation is that they're in. And I'm going to cut off my synopsis there because I think that this book very heavily relies on the reader not knowing a lot. I think this is like a comp title for Leave the World Behind or The Long Walk. I was so in shock after reading this book of what like the implications of the book were, and I just couldn't stop thinking about what the messages of this book must be and trying to figure those out. I am so glad that I vlogged the experience of reading this so you can see in real time how I was feeling about this book. I still think about how this book made me feel and how following this main character in these very special circumstances made me feel. So this, I do think I have officially given it a 5 star. So we have had 2 episodes of 5 Star Finder, and we have had a 5 star in each, which is awesome. Then we have Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is my 3rd Emily Henry. I've previously read People We Meet on Vacation and Book Lovers, which I gave a like 4.25 and then like a 3.5 respectively. And this is her first rom-com. This is about January, who has been a hopeless romantic all her life. Her parents have been a very great model for her. But when her father passed away, she found out that he had been cheating on her mother for a long time, and that sort of shattered her expectations. She's an author who writes romance, and she feels like she can't write about that anymore because she is so disheartened. Without a lot of choices, she ends up going to the house on a Michigan lake that her father owned with his mistress and trying to isolate herself so that she can write her new novel. And it turns out that her college rival, Gus Everett, who is a very successful literary fiction author, is staying in the house right next door. They are both struggling to write, and they decide to swap genres. This book is such a divisive one for me because I adore January. I love her to death. One of my favorite main characters I've read about in a long time. However, this is a romance book, and I did not like Gus. At the beginning, when they weren't interacting as much and they were just having banter occasionally, I was liking him, but the further we went on, I really didn't like how he had a real problem communicating any of his feelings. He was very hot and cold with January, wasn't telling her anything even though he was wanting her to tell him about things, and it really just spelled so many red flags for me. All of the literary fiction stuff of our main character trying to work on herself and her journey, fantastic. I think it's the best writing I've seen from Emily Henry. I didn't like the love interest. This is a really hard one for me to rate because Book Lovers, I gave it a 3.5 because it wasn't bad, but I didn't have strong feelings about it. And this one I had very strong feelings about it, but they were very mixed. So I do think I am also giving this a 3.5. I'm still going to continue picking her up, but I've yet to have a 5-star from her, and I've gotta stop sometime if I'm not going to absolutely be obsessed with one of her books. Then the last book of the vlog was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in Between the Earth and Sky, which is a fantasy trilogy that is inspired by pre-Columbian America and the indigenous societies and the different cultures mixed in with also mythology and magic. At the beginning of this book, there are 20 days left until a total solar eclipse on the winter solstice, and all of these different clans or political, religious groups believe that something is going to happen. There's rumors that a dark god is going to be reincarnated, and everybody is locking it down, preparing for some shit to go down. We have Shiala, who is from a culture that people discriminate against, but she has magical powers that help her be a ship captain. And there's also Serapio, who is the boy who had his eyes sewn shut by his mother when he was a child because she believes he's going to be the new avatar for the Crow God. There's a couple other characters, but those two end up crossing paths and going to the same place and are the meat of this book. I have been putting off reading this for so long. I finally got the push to read it because of this video, and I'm very glad that I did because I ended up giving it a 4. I really do think that this is a very solid start to a series. It is multi-perspective, but it's not even 400 pages. We don't actually get that much of each character. What was there, I really liked, and I just wanted more. I wanted this book to be 500 going on 600 pages to really go into depth about what these characters are going through, what their backstories are like, what the whole political sphere is like. Our two main characters, I really enjoyed the two of them together. I liked their dynamic a lot and how they're wanting to learn about each other, and I did feel for their connection. I just wanted to know more about every single thing that we interacted with. And maybe future books are where that deep dive is going to come about. Then I finally picked up Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. Leviathan Wakes was one of my favorite books that I read a couple of years ago, and I had low-key been waiting for these new 10th anniversary editions to come out to match my 10th anniversary edition of Leviathan Wakes. So I do have this one, and I have the next book. This is the second book in the Expanse series, which is a space opera about a group of spacers who don't really have a lot of power, but they are in the middle of a interplanetary war that is brewing. And in the first book, there is a plague or virus that starts making people very zombie-like, and that has ramifications into this book. And I really liked all the new characters that we follow. James Holden's our main character, and he's sort of the loyalty, you have to do what's right type character. He'll sacrifice himself for his crew, but doesn't take their voice into account because of that. And he's also a person who just wants to disseminate information to the masses even if that's going to like cause chaos. It's worked for him before, but now he's running into problems where like not all of his leadership decisions are actually the right ones, and he's coming into contact with new people who might be able to help him out more. The beginning of this book, I was struggling with the stakes. Like I didn't actually feel like I knew everything that was going on. I wasn't really sure of like the scale of time that was going on, but by the back half, I thought the back half was absolutely fantastic. Definitely what I loved about the first one. The one thing I think I did have to complain about was Holden's relationship with Naomi. I just didn't think he treated her well enough for like me to forgive him. It kind of came across as like Naomi just being the girlfriend character instead of being like the intelligent engineer she's supposed to be. But that was a small portion of this book, and there were a couple of other female characters that were so different from what we normally see in this sort of setting, particularly written by men, and I thought they were great. Avasarala is like my favorite. So I'm definitely looking forward to continuing this series. I think I'm giving this one a 4.5. It wasn't the full 5 like I liked the first book because, again, like the first half, I was kind of feeling more meh about it, but it stuck the landing. Then I read The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. This is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series. I'm not much of a mystery reader, but I think this and getting back into Agatha Christie has convinced me that I need to try out more mystery books rather than thrillers. Because I did have a good time with this one. This series is about a group of septuagenarians in a retirement living community, and they meet every Thursday to try to solve cold cases, and at the beginning of the first book, a murder actually occurs near their retirement community, and they decide that they are going to investigate it. They have a nurse, they have a psychology professor, they have an MI6 agent, they have a strong man, and together they are going to solve the crime. And this one, I feel like this felt like a lot of the British crime TV that I've watched, but cozier. I don't watch American crime TV. I'll watch British crime TV. The crime itself that's going on in here, there was a reporter who several years ago, her car was found pushed off of a cliff and her body was never found, and she has been presumed dead for 10 years, and our main characters are trying to solve the mystery of why she was killed and how the crime that she was investigating has to do with her death. I think I had a slightly better time with this book than the second book. I'd probably put it on par with the first book. I really like the balance of following our different main characters. I like the composition that they have together, and I do like the comedy of this mixed in with the mystery itself. There were definitely things that surprised me and I didn't expect about this mystery. I'm not really good at solving these books, but I don't think that it took me so far aback that I was like, oh my god, new favorite plot twist. There was one character that I was very convinced was a bad person, and I was glad that I got it wrong, because I have been very good at predicting bad guys lately and plot twists. I don't know, I'm having a lot of fun with this series and I'm really excited to read the next one. Then I read an e-arc that was provided me by NetGalley of Emma Lord's new book, The Breakup Pact. I've not read Emma Lord before, but this book just interested me, so I picked it up. And this is such a convoluted synopsis, but our main character, when her sister died several years ago, she returned to their small beach town and took over her sister's business. They had created and brainstormed together when they were kids. It's a scone tea business that is currently about to go under, but our main character also had a crush on her sister's best friend in high school, who also was like basically like a family friend, and they basically haven't talked since high school when he rejected her. Both of them end up going through separate viral breakups that their partner cheated on them, and he comes back home to like get out of the spotlight, and our main character's best friend is also trying to become a journalist. So the three of them decide to get together to try to create a fake relationship. Oh yeah, there's a wedding going on and they're going to be maid of honor and best man, so they have to do some wedding planning things. Like, is that not such a fucking complicated synopsis? I wasn't obsessed with this one. I think that this tried to shove so many different tropes into one book that it sort of cluttered the whole thing. There's siblings, best friend, childhood friends to lovers, fake dating, planning a wedding together, forced proximity. Like, there's so many different tropes that they're trying to like coincide to this one book that it felt bogged down. I wasn't necessarily sold that these people were childhood best friends. I did really like the small town vibes. I liked that she's like involved in her family. I didn't end up liking any of the fake dating aspect of this. I thought that like the whole like trying to make this social media viral thing felt really fake and like not true to life. I think I've learned I don't really like fame, specifically internet fame, playing a part in a romance book at all. There was a portion of this book that I was getting into it when we were kind of moving on from the fake dating thing. The thing is that like the third act conflict in this is almost identical to Beach Read. Really didn't like that. However, the ending part I actually really liked. Never really had a romance book that I didn't really like a lot of the meat of it, and then I really liked the ending. The whole thing was like handled in a mature way. This just wasn't for me, and I probably won't be picking up Emma Lord in the future just because I was rolling my eyes or just like not being fully in love or believing this romance. There wasn't really a lot that I can say that I liked about this book, so I'm just gonna be giving it a 2.5. Then I finally got my hands on this book that I have been wanting to read since it was published, and that is The Way to the Stars by Kay Ancrum. This is a YA, mostly coming of age story with a little bit of sci-fi in it. So this is told in a really interesting way where all of the chapters are super tiny. Like maybe the longest chapter is 10 pages, but most of the chapters are maybe a page long. It's told in basically vignettes, seeing our characters interact with each other. Our main character, she's struggling. Her parents have passed away and she's trying to take care of her brother who's voluntary mutism and his son, and she basically has assembled this friend group of kids who were troublemakers and like not performing very well, and made like a group of outcasts come together, and a new girl comes to school. It turns out her mother was in this very famous space program where a bunch of teenagers were sent out into space to basically be a living golden record like they had on the Voyager, with the intention of never coming back home. This character's mother got pregnant with her before she would take off, which was not supposed to happen. And she ended up taking off anyway. This girl, Alexandria, has been trying desperately all of her life to get as much communication from her mom as she can on these radio waves. I think if I had read this when I was still reading a ton of YA, maybe more closer to when it came out, this would have been full 5 stars. I really loved the use of the vignettes. I thought it was really effective, especially at the beginning when you don't know a lot about our characters and you're just slowly picking up different things about them. I liked how our main characters interacted with each other, how like not everybody's getting along all the time, but everybody loves each other and is trying to do the best that they can. I like the sci-fi aspect of this and how they are trying to figure out as much as they can about what's happening with Alexandria's mother. I really liked the speculative twist on this and how the world is slightly different than our own in the sci-fi way, and I really loved the ending and the flavor of it all. I am definitely interested in picking up more from Kay Ancrum. I know The Wicker King is really popular, and she also just released a new book called Icarus, so that's definitely something I can look into. Then for my book club 3 of clubs, the theme that we're reading is Friends to Lovers, which is a romance trope that has really worked for me in the past. One of my best friends on Instagram, Katie, is the biggest Friends to Lover fan that I know, and she helped me sort of inform some of my decisions on this, and she's sort of helping me out. But I ended up picking for the first book The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. Sarah Adams is an author who I was interested individually in her romances before I found out that they were all by the same author. So I was like, oh, she's got a Friends to Lovers one. It's a pretty popular one when it comes to the trope, so I thought I'd pick it up. This is about our main character, Bree. She's a dance teacher, and her life was put off of track when she got into a car accident before she could go to Juilliard or dance school. Her best friend is a star football player, Nathan. She has been in love with him since they were in high school, but after her accident, she ended up forcing them to part ways because she didn't want to hold him back. And as adults, they ended up moving to the same town, rekindling their relationship. Finally, they're both single at the same time, and shit goes down and they end up fake dating because of course they do, but Nathan takes this as an opportunity alongside his football team to make a plan to have her finally see him in a romantic way. So it takes a little bit of a different turn on the fake dating of like one of them is actively using this to make the relationship happen, which actually worked out comedically really well. I did like whenever the football team was involved. Unfortunately, that wasn't very much of the book. The first chapter of this book is atrocious. Our main character is so shitty in the first chapter of this book, how she's treating Nathan's girlfriend at the time, that I think it turned off multiple people from this book. I don't care that like these two characters are in love with each other, you just don't talk to people like that. It was really disrespectful. I don't know, I wasn't sold on the romance. I think a lot of things had me rolling my eyes. I had to pause the audiobook and step away from it multiple times because I was just cringing so hard. Unlike The Breakup Pact, I do think that this sort of sells that these characters know each other like the back of their hand. They've been best friends for a very long time, and you can tell that. And I just wish like we had any sort of individual arc of either of these characters. There were a couple of scenes that I really enjoyed compared to most of the book I was having a hard time with. And I think the majority of the club has been having the same problems with it, which is unfortunate because I do own a Sarah Adams. I have Practice Makes Perfect right there. I'll read that one because I own it, but I'm not super excited about it. I'm gonna give this the same 2.5 stars that I gave The Breakup Pact. Reading 3 romance books in a month, all of which didn't really work with me, and all 3 of them kind of had a Venn diagram of things that were similar about them that I didn't like, was not having a good time. So I do have high hopes for our May pick, and that is Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane, who wrote The Charm Offensive, which was a really fun one. So if you want to join us for May, please do. Links in the description for the Discord. Then I read Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This is not a book that I would have picked up for myself, but it was gifted to me. This is like a Regency era gothic-y fantasy where our main character has been haunted by death her whole life. So many people, so many of her guardians have died, and she's had to shift around a lot. She also, not only can she see spirits, but she can see death himself. And this is a book in which our main character falls in love with death. Her cousin is ill, and she believes she is being poisoned, and that her aunt before her died of being poisoned. So she is trying to figure out the murder mystery alongside death, figuring out her powers of being able to interact with the spirit world and being the first human to ever see death. I think the atmosphere was really good, of like gothic era mixed with Regency Bridgerton-y era. I usually like when death is personified or any sort of speculative thing like that, and I think this, for the most part, did exactly what it said it was going to do. So this is YA, but it does toes that line of what is too sexually explicit for YA, and I didn't love that. I think that this should have been marketed as new adult or adult because of that. I predicted 90% of the stuff that happened when it came to the murder mystery sort of thing. I particularly picked up something that was happening with the romance from literally the first few scenes interacting with a character, which I think was supposed to be a massive plot twist, and it just wasn't. I just like didn't have a lot of strong feelings about this book, so I don't think I'll continue in the series, but if somebody was looking for something that was specifically gothic YA, that this is something I might be able to push toward them. Then I listened to How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, which this is a nonfiction that has to do with how America today interacts and tries to reckon with, or not reckon with, its history of slavery. Okay, I need to stop being surprised when I love a nonfiction. I keep picking up some of the most popular, most powerful nonfiction books because they are so lauded. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, and so when I pick what is the cream of the crop, I'm like, oh my god, nonfiction's great. I really should have expected how fantastic that this book is. Our author is a poet and a scholar, and he decided to go around to different sites, mostly in America, all having to do with the American slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, and visit these sites and see how they are portraying slavery today. So he goes to places like Monticello and Angola Prison and Galveston. He goes on the educational tours that they have and looks at how they are actually talking about slavery, how the different people who work there are talking about slavery. There's some sites that are trying to do their best to have discussions about slavery, but maybe most of the people who come to the site don't really feel like hearing about that. Or the site is really, really good about talking about slavery, but there are divides in the community about how they want to actually portray different things. There's an example of a place that has completely swept its history with slavery and how it still relates to that today under the rug. We see a lot of different examples, but overall, we see a general reluctance to reckon with what slavery was to begin with and how it affects us today. It's very clear that Clint Smith is also a poet. The way that he writes is so particular and specific. He gives so many very specific details about all of the experiences he's having on this trip. You feel like you're there next to him. That I just thought that this was absolutely fantastic, and I can't stop thinking about the things that I read in this book. I will 100% be recommending this. I don't normally put nonfiction books in my favorite books of the year because you don't review fiction and nonfiction in the same way, but I think this has a very good chance of making it. Then the last book I read in April was Those Beyond the Wall by Micaiah Johnson. Micaiah Johnson wrote one of my favorite sci-fi books of all time, one of my favorite books, and that is The Space Between Worlds, which is a book about multiversal travel. And our main character in that book is one of the few people who can hop to a ton of different worlds because her double in those worlds is dead in almost all of them. And one of her last surviving doubles has died. She's going to investigate her murder. That is one of the most plot twisty books I have ever read in my life. It had me by the throat. About 5 years later, this is a companion novel. It is a sequel, so you definitely shouldn't read this book first, but it is not a direct sequel because it is following different characters. It has a different arc, but a lot of our setting and characters are the same. So in this setting, we have Wiley City, which is a domed utopian city where the population is very white and they're all very protected, and they have a lot of discriminatory beliefs about the people who live beyond the walls, who live in the desert, and they have a emperor there who has like a gang of runners who end up doing all of his bidding. And our main character Scales is one of those runners. Suddenly people in both Ashtown and in Wiley City start dying very violently, and Scales is one of the people who is trying to investigate what's happening. I was surprised at how much crossover there was with book one, like how many of our characters are people that we saw, and I did think that was fun, but I kind of wish it had been closer between reading these two books because of that, because I wanted to remember everything. This was inspired by the author's experience protesting at the People's Plaza in Nashville, and that a lot of her rage around that what informed this book about like policing and stuff like that. And I thought that those themes were done so well in this book. I really enjoyed in this book and the last book how Micaiah Johnson takes all of these themes and synthesizes them into great sci-fi setting, which oftentimes can be fun to interact with. I think I found this book a little bit harder to follow in the first half or so. I had a pretty good idea of how the characters' interpersonal relationships were going to play out, so that wasn't a particular surprise, but there were so many things that did take me by surprise, so many plot twists. I do think Micaiah Johnson needs to be read more because she has a way of throwing 80 million things at you in a way that I have not experienced with any other author. Even though I did like the plot of this book, I wasn't as excited about following the characters that we followed in this book. So I was a little bit less emotionally invested, and so I'm not sure if I wasn't following all the different twists because I wasn't as invested, or if I wasn't as invested because I wasn't following all the twists. I don't know which one informed the other. I did give this a very strong 4-star, and I think that more people need to be reading this author. Those are all the books that I read in April. Let me know what you read in April. If there's anything that you read from my pile that you want to talk about, I'd love to talk about them with you. I have a fun lineup of books that I'm going to be reading in May, so hopefully I'm on an upward trend. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to follow me anywhere, my Instagram, my Goodreads, my book club, my Etsy, all of that is in the singular link down in the description. And as always, I will see you in the next one.